Hi, I'm Philip. I'm going to show you how to write Hello World in Forest, which is a tree editor for TypeScript. First, head over to the Forest GitHub page and open the Play with Forest link. So what you'll see is this big box on the screen with these two little gray boxes in it. One of them is an empty folder, and the other one is an empty TypeScript file, which is a child of that folder. To navigate around this tree in Forest, you use your arrow keys. So you can press left to go up one level and right to go down to the next child. So let's first take a look at the program we want to write as text. So as I said, we're going to write hello world. Specifically, console log hello world. So writing this in a text editor is something you've done a million times before. You're used to it. Writing this in a tree editor is a little different. I'm going to write out console log hello world here first so you can get an idea of what it will look like, and then we'll go through it step by step. So let me just write it out without explaining anything. Okay, so here we have console log hello world. Let's look at the structure in a little more detail. So maybe it's a little clearer now how the tree is stacked up. So on the left we have nodes which are higher up in the tree, and on the right we have stuff which is deeper and deeper into the tree. So for example, this node which says call is a child of the one which is a child of the one which says expression statement, and the call node has 4 children of its own. In the gray, these names describe what the child is relative to the parent, and the rest of the text is just describing the child itself. So at the bottom here, we have the arguments to the function, and there could be multiple children under this, so multiple arguments. But here we have just one argument, which is this red string literal node. So red nodes in Forest are always literals, things like numbers, constant strings, stuff like that. And if we go back up the tree up to here, this thing labeled expression is the function that we're going to call. Sometimes these labels aren't very clear because this is all pretty close to the TypeScript AST, the syntax tree of TypeScript. But you get the general idea. We're calling console log here. So let's take a look at the text version of this program in Forest. For that, you need to open up your developer console when you have an actual program written, and press 0 to see the code. So that's something we're going to use as we're writing this code up step by step. So let me just reset the window here, start with an empty program, and we can write console log step by step. So to start, navigate over to this main TS node by pressing right. So now it's highlighted in this gray, that's the focus node. And down here, you see different stuff you can do with this focus node. So what we're going to use is this action called append. Append adds a new child of some type to a node. And since this is a TypeScript file, it will add some kind of child that you could have in a TypeScript file. So let's press Control right for append, and we'll see it as this thing called empty statement. So what is that? If we look at a text version of this program, that would just be generated as like a semicolon by itself on its own line, which is not really a program we usually write, but still a valid TypeScript program. So this is a default, and all the defaults in Forest currently are usually pretty unhelpful, but technically valid in terms of the type of node that they are. So usually you just want to switch them out straight away. So the way we switch out this empty statement for something else is with the set variant action. So with your cursor focused on this empty statement, like this, press V to pull up the set variant menu. It starts out with this prompt, which says something about shortcut keys. We don't need those at the moment, so just press space to go to the search view. So now this is the search view, and you get this list of stuff. And these things are all things that you could replace, that you could put here instead of this empty statement. So you have things like imports, for loops, if statements, things like that, function declarations. What we want is a call, right? We want to call console log. So if I search for call here, I get no results. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is in the difference between statements and expressions. So if you've never heard of statements versus expressions before, the difference is roughly just kind of a grouping of different things into categories. So for example, this is an import statement, as we usually say. And for example, this is a string literal, which is an expression. This is a binary expression. And this function declaration here is a statement. So syntax is kind of grouped into these groups of expressions versus statements. And I said that this was an expression, but we can actually put it at the top level of a file and use it like a statement, because the things at the top level of a file are statements. And the reason we can do that is because TypeScript has this kind of adapter node, and it's called an expression statement. So if you search for expression statement in this set variant menu here, you'll find it. So let's press enter and replace it into our tree to see how it looks. So the empty statement node has been replaced with an expression statement. And this expression statement now has a child of its own, which is the expression over here, which is specifically an empty string literal. So open up your developer console and press 0 down here to print this program as a text program in the console. So this thing over here is our whole program. It's an empty string on its own line, which is a valid TypeScript program, but not a very useful one. But the point of this is just to show you that you can print your program to the console with 0 to take a look at it and kind of better understand what you've made in the tree. So we don't need this string on its own line. We need a function call. And so like last time we tried to do that, we pressed set variant and we couldn't find the function call in the list over here, because the things we write under a TypeScript file are always statements. If you go over here though, in this position we have an expression. And if you press V to go into the set variant menu and space to go through to the search view, you'll see that the list here is a little bit different. So now we have stuff we didn't have before, like this expression, string literal, Boolean literal, stuff like that. So these are all expressions, whereas the stuff we had in this set variant menu were all statements. And now we can find what we need, which is a function call. Press enter to select it. So again, you go to set variant, you search for call expression, and you press enter. Now we have a function call. I'm going to press 0 to print this program. This is what we get as a printout. So this is actually not a valid TypeScript program syntactically, because this tree doesn't generate to a valid program at the moment. And that usually happens when you're using empty values in places where you aren't really allowed to have them. But it's still sometimes useful to understand what you've got in your tree, even if it's not valid. So these brackets here are actually the call brackets of a function call. So let's start writing out the hello world call. And let's start with the arguments, because it's a little easier to explain that way. So use your arrow keys to navigate down to the arguments node. This is the parent of all the arguments to the function call. And you see it only has one possible action, the append. So just like we did with the TypeScript file, we wanted to add something new to it, we pressed Control right. We do the same to this arguments list. Let's press Control right on the arguments node to get a new argument. This argument at the moment is an empty string. If you press 0, you'll see our function call with the single empty string being passed. we don't want an empty string, we want the string hello world. And to get that, we can use this new action over here, set from string. Set from string you can use on numbers, strings, names of stuff to give them a value. So press S and you'll get the prompt for a value down here. Type in hello world and press enter to set the value. Now if you press 0, you'll see we have a function call without the name of a function we're calling yet. But we're passing the argument hello world like we should be as a string. Okay, so now let's go to the console log. I'm going to do an in-between step here, and instead of doing a console log, we'll first do a prompt. And you'll see why in a minute. So move up here to this node labeled expression. This is the name of the function we want to call effectively in this particular configuration. So you'll see it also has a set from string. So let's use that. Set from string using S, type prompt, and press enter. Now if you press 0, you'll see prompt hello world in your console. So that's actually a valid program, and it's pretty close to console log hello world, but not quite. So why did I show you a prompt first, instead of going straight to console log? The reason is they're syntactically a bit different. So whereas prompt hello world, the prompt here is only really highlighted with one color. It's kind of one thing. And the console log hello world has actually these two sections highlighted in two different colors with a dot in between. So it has a bit more structure than just a flat piece of text. And to generate a valid program in Forest, we need to replicate that structure. So you could actually set from string on this and type console log, and that will actually generate the right program as well. But that's really just coincidence that it does. It's not really valid to do it that way. So we have to actually replicate the correct tree structure in Forest. So I'm going to set this back to a prompt. And we're going to change it, the whole expression over here, to be a property access. Property access with the object console and the property log. So focus this expression node and press set variant. V for set variant. Press space to get to the search menu. And in here, you'll see we have the list of stuff we had when we were choosing an expression, like for the call expression. And one of these things is going to be a property access expression. Search for property until you find that and select it. So the tree will change to show something like this. This is another one of Forest weird defaults. Again, it's technically correct, even though it won't generate a valid program because we haven't filled it out. But I'm going to press 0 and see what we have. So we have these curly braces here, then a dot, and then the kind of call brackets for the function call. This pair of curly brackets over here corresponds to this node. It's an object literal. And the thing that's missing between this dot and these call brackets corresponds to the name of the property we would have. But the name of this property is currently empty. That's represented by the string over here. So let's go set the name of the property first. Move over to this string and see if we can use the set from string on it. Just press S and type log here. Okay. Now if you press 0, you'll see the program is calling log on this empty object literal here, which syntactically is valid. Now we're going to write console log. So instead of using this empty object literal here, we want to reference an existing object, an existing value. And the type of node you use to do that is an identifier. So press set variant when focused on this object literal to replace it with something else. Press space to go into the search menu and find an identifier. An identifier is like a reference to a variable. So when you type a variable name without quotes, without anything else, not after a dot, just by itself, that's usually an identifier, syntactically. Press enter to choose the identifier, and you'll get this blue box. And notice it's the same blue that we had when we had the prompt back there, because prompt was syntactically an identifier. This box is totally empty because our identifier is empty at the moment. If you print the program, you'll get this. That's actually where the identifier should go before this dot. So press S when focused on this identifier, the blue one, to fill it out. Type console, and that looks okay. Now press 0, and there we have it. Console log printed as text, written as a tree in forest. So I know that was quite a lot, and I know it took a while to write and explain how to write this console log. Writing stuff in a tree is pretty different from writing it in text, and forest is also just a prototype, so a lot of the stuff isn't working yet. But I'd really enjoy it if people tried forest, take a look at the other videos, try writing a simple thing in it, see what you think, and get a feel for this whole tree editing thing. Okay, so that's it. See you.